Yes, Germany loves Europe. But if you're a parent and you love your child, you don't continue to finance their bad habits. You teach them how to survive in the world. We're proud to propose the motion.
Thank you very much to the final speaker on the government side. Let us now conclude the official speakers with the return of our Prime Minister, doubling up as whip from the Cambridge team, Mr. Michael Dunn.
Ladies and gentlemen, is this good economically? Is this good politically? Is this good scientifically and culturally? Once again, in the words of Margaret Thatcher, no, no, no. Now, we on this side of the House, once again, take issue with Proposition's definition of the motion. Okay? They said that they gave us the example of taking a haircut. They said if everyone in the world would benefit from you taking a haircut, should you do it? Yes, you should. Second, they gave us the example, they spent their entire time talking about the Eurozone. The motion says this House would let Europe die. This is a possibility that the Proposition conceded that they needed to consider. This is a possibility that Jia Wei explained would be a probability. Why? Because of the economic chaos that would ensue and because Germany would be regarded as a pariah, meaning that NAFTA-esque reconstruction of Europe with Germany's cooperation would be impossible. Proposition must address this. They have failed to do so. We win. Okay, those 3 points of clash. First, economics. So we're going to begin by a consideration of debt. So first, the government claimed that the share of the debt that Germany is paying is disproportionate. Second, they claimed it was unpayable. First claim is false. About a quarter of Eurozone GDP is German. No, thank you. A quarter of the debt is also being paid by Germany. It is proportionate. Second, is it possible to pay it back? Well, they conceded that the total Eurozone debt that needed to be paid back in peripheral regions constituted 27% of GDP. German GDP. Said that in the last speech. They also said in the first speech that 28% of GDP, that Germany is paying 28% of debt back. That means 28% times 25%, that Germany needs to pay 8% of its GDP as its contribution to stabilizing European debt. That is the UK's current deficit. I think that's a payable quantity. Okay. They then said that, well, if they then spoke about what happens we then like to talk about what happens when Germany pulls out of the euro. When Germany pulls out of the euro, the single currency quite clearly collapses. Why? Because sovereign debt can no longer be financed. At that point, we see a massive devaluation, okay, in peripheral zone currencies. Why? Because they principally import rather than exporting, meaning they have a substantial trade deficit, meaning the value of their currency decreases. That means they can't repay their debt because their currency is worthless. Okay, second area, currency. So they spoke about, no thank you, how governments need to control individual currencies. Well, let me tell you something, guys. Governments can't control their individual currencies. The trade balance controls the individual value of the currency. Why? No thank you. Because if you export a lot, people buy your products. When they buy your products, they also implicitly buy your currency. More people are buying your currency. By supply and demand, the value of your currency increases. That means, in a second, your currency is more expensive to buy. Yes?
Have you heard of something called central banking and things like the Federal
I
Reserve?
have heard of something called thank you very much. I have heard of something called central banking. Milton Friedman proposed that it could solve all our problems. How did that work out? Okay, now let's consider. So when you import a lot, the value of your currency and hence the value of your products increases, which means people are less willing to buy them. Okay, what happens if you import a lot? Well, you sell a lot, so you sell a lot of your currency. You buy a lot, and therefore you buy a lot, and therefore you need a high purchasing power. The problem is if you don't export, then people aren't buying your currency, so the value of your currency depreciates. At that point, you have less purchasing power to buy the products that you do as an importing nation. Therefore, your economic growth decreases. Okay? The euro constitutes a happy medium in this, mixing the exporting power of countries like Germany and France with countries that are more import-driven. Okay? That means that the currency maintains a stable level somewhere in the middle, which works for everyone. Okay. We then heard material from Jia Wei about collective action, freedom of capital, freedom of movement, freedom of production, completely unresponded to. Again, we'd like to highlight the motion here says the death of Europe, right? The death of Europe would very clearly mean that these freedoms would be fatally undermined, okay? I'm sorry, guys, the motion doesn't say Eurozone, it says Europe. Then we heard the case for economic reform. So these guys said that there's a perverse incentive to not reform your economy if the Germans are paying all your debt. Well, this completely ignores the situation on the ground. Look at IMF-imposed austerity in Greece, upheaval in the labour market, massive structural reform of public services. The thing is, we want creative destruction, guys, not total destruction. Jarway explained why this would be total destruction. Okay, suitcases running across borders full of money equals total destruction.
Absolutely not. So.
No, thank you. Now, politics. Okay, so what happens here politically? So the government only gave us one argument here. They said, this is popular, so we should do it. Now, I do math, but the German people have thought many things are popular, and not all of them have been good ideas, guys, right? We don't think this is a really cogent argument. So, what would the political consequences of this motion be? So first, the European Union's role as a mediator would be fundamentally undermined. Why? Because what the European Union does is it takes bilateral disputes, no thank you, and puts them in a multilateral context, right? So that you can see that your bilateral dispute is actually relatively small in terms of the whole symbiotic organism that is the European Union. Go.
So the United States is not part of the European Union. Do they find themselves able to engage in multilateral discussions, ignoring sort of the Iraq war?
Fantastic. I'm about to get to that, if I may. Okay, so let's look then at multilateral discussions with the United States for Germany and for Europe, right? So we believe in the principle of collective bargaining. We think the entire history of labour relations sort of underscores that this is a fairly important thing. Okay, so look at the negotiations of the North American Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, both major free trade agreements being negotiated currently or that have been negotiated in the past. They took over a decade each, right? The reason for that is because you had 27 different parties, each trying to negotiate on their terms. What the European Union does is it gives European nations a single representative, making collective bargaining with countries like the United States a hell of a lot easier. Okay, what about the rise of extremist political parties? So these guys said it's IMF, i.e. German-imposed austerity, that gives Golden Dawn their strength. Fine, we concede that, right? But what we also say is that at the point at which Germany refuses to fund any Greek debt anymore, meaning there's a big 28% shortfall, okay, in the degree to which Greeks are able to pay back their debt, okay, we think Golden Dawn are going to get much, much angrier because of all the economic collapse that Jarway explained to you. Okay, finally, science and culture. This material was brought to you by Tin. It was completely unresponded to. It was said very recently, so I'm not going to repeat it. Suffice it to say, scientifically and culturally, this would be disastrous. They didn't contest that. Ladies and gentlemen, because it's terrible economically, it's terrible politically, and it's terrible in every other conceivable way, we urge you to oppose. Thank you.